While there's a lot of different metrics one can use to review a video game and kind of try to determine its overall quality, ranging from gameplay to graphics to music to story to voice acting, there's lots of different things. Today I kind of want to look at them from the perspective of concept and execution. Now, these two are not mutually exclusive, but I think the more you try to improve one, the harder it gets to maintain the other. So maybe let's just go into a bit of detail about this. So the games that I think you could probably say have the best execution are like the Call of Duty games, kind of the mainstream AAA style of games. Like, all of the Call of Duty games are pretty much the same, but they're all very cinematic. They have good music. The gameplay's tight. They don't have many bugs when they come out. It's a very well put together first-person shooter experience. And they basically succeed in executing it nearly perfect. And I guess you could put a lot of like beat 'em ups into that category. I would actually argue, I guess you could make the case that these are either conceptual or execution. I'd put a lot of JRPGs into the execution category, because at the end of the day, a lot of them are just kind of generic, paint by numbers. A machine could write them, but they fulfill like what a JRPG is supposed to have in its most generic form. It's super long. There's a lot of grinding. There's some waifus in it. It's just kind of bland. Like I said, just bland, long, and has basic turn-based RPG elements. And those are just cranked out endlessly. And there's no real ambition to it. There's no real, I guess you could say, vision. But it delivers what it's supposed to do, and it delivers it in a functional manner. And then at the other hand, you have games that are conceptual but not have an interesting concept but aren't really well executed. Probably the ultimate example of this is Paradox games. Now, all of Paradox games are conceptually extremely ambitious. Victoria 2 had a complete global economic simulator built in. Crusader Kings 2 has thousands of different AIs going by at any given time, all of which have distinct personalities. You have to manage relationships with like hundreds of different vassals. It's an extremely complex, ambitious game. Europa Universalis 4, once again, you have the entire world. And then you have Hearts of Iron, which has, once again, extremely kind of complicated. But generally speaking, at least for the first year or so that these games are out, they can't execute them. They come out, they're full of errors, they're full of bugs. It feels like they don't even play test them. You have to buy DLC in a lot of cases to make them functional. Like, I remember when Victoria 2 came out, before they patched it, anything you did or didn't do led to rebels being created. So I think I had like 5 or 6 Jacobin revolutions in the span of a year, because it just kept generating rebels. So that's kind of like Paradox games for you. And then they'll introduce stuff like, oh, we want to put the plague in. But the plague is obnoxious and just kills everybody really aggressively to a point where it's not fun anymore. So that's kind of what you have for Paradox. It's an example of kind of concept. A lot of, I guess you could say, kind of artsy games. I don't really play that many of them. I think maybe something like point-and-click adventures, some of those kind of games, because it's like there'll be an interesting concept. Like, it might be like this Lovecraftian story. It might try to be very psychological and like analyze your personality and react, or it's trying to be like meta and they put kind of stuff inside of it that's kind of supposed to be kind of taking advantage of your preconceptions or something like that, but is just not really playable. and the gameplay isn't good. It's very boring, or it's very slow, or it's not very intuitive, or that sort of thing. So you kind of have these two ends. They're not so much of a spectrum, but the more kind of ambitious and complicated and high concept something gets, the harder it is, I think, to really deliver on implementation. Some examples of games I think that achieve both is early BioWare. Knights of the Old Republic is an extremely high concept in terms of trying to make a very serious, plot-driven, character-driven Star Wars game that gives you a lot of choice. And in the case of KOTOR 2, really delves deeply into kind of the philosophical ramifications of the Force. But the gameplay is also solid. The combat's fun. It works well. Mass Effect is also like that, a very high concept, ambitious game that delivered satisfying combat and a good dialogue system. I guess you could say arguably something like Stalker, maybe, because the gameplay is a lot of fun, although it does suffer from being kind of niche and being kind of strapped together in a very bootleg fashion. And then maybe I'd also put a lot of Nintendo games, like Ocarina of Time, very ambitious for the time, but very well executed. Most of the Fire Emblem games, I think maybe the Persona games or the SMT games are another really good example of this, because the Persona games are so ultra ambitious in what they're trying to accomplish with all of the characters and all the dialogue and how long they are. But it's well executed, particularly like as they go on, they get better and better at it. Persona 5 is much more streamlined than 3 or 4 is, even if it is ultimately longer. They eliminated a lot of annoying things and made it more straightforward. So, why am I talking about all this? Well, this brings us to Dragon Commander. Dragon Commander is part of the much celebrated, extremely high quality Divinity series. I believe the first game was called Divine Divinity, and then there was Divinity 2, the Dragon Knight Saga, which I think was like Dracos or something, and then there was another one. And then there was Divinity, Dragon Commander, and then there's Divinity, I think it's Original Sin. It's either Original Sin or Eternal Sin, one of the two, which is like an isometric turn-based RPG. And that's supposed to be actually really good. It gets good reviews on Steam. But this isn't that. This is Dragon Commander. So they took the Divinity series, because I played Divinity 2, Dragon Knight. I played a fair amount of it, maybe like 6 or 7 hours. It's kind of a fairly straightforward, high fantasy RPG. I guess you could say. The gimmick is part of the way through the game you get the ability to transform into a dragon. And there's like flying levels, and you can just fly around and shoot things with fireballs. And that's pretty cool. And that's kind of the gimmick they have to draw people in. It wasn't really enough to keep me playing the game, but it's kind of interesting. So they said, okay, so what we're going to do is not take the setting of the Divinity games. We're going to go back like 1,000 years or whatever before the Divinity games, because that's what people play them for, the lore. We're going to go back like to the point where the lore is completely like not helpful, and we're going to make it steampunk, even though the original game I don't think was steampunk, at least from what I remember. We're going to make it not that, and we're going to make it an RTS, TBS, RPG hybrid. It's going to be like Total War. It's going to be like a Paradox game. It's going to be so ambitious. And I remember when I first saw the concept, I liked it. It's like, okay, so they have tactical combat, strategic things like resource management, and then like RPG elements. And I'm like, this is a good idea. This kind of reminds me of something like like I said, Total War or Fire Emblem Three Houses or something like that. So I like the idea, and it was sold as like you have to build up your relationships with the different races and balance their different interests, and that determines whether you succeed or fail. So maybe let's just kind of go through the 3 levels of the game, because they all suck, and they didn't deliver on anything, and this is one of the most phoned-in, half-assed, unfinished pieces of garbage I've ever played. But it's bad in an interesting way. So let's first talk about the tactical combat. So I think it's called Total Annihilation or Supreme Commander or something. It's one of those RPGs where it's just about spamming as many units as you can. The units have like weird names that don't really seem to correspond with what they do. Like the anti-vehicle missile mech is a grenadier, and there's like a blimp that heals people and it's called a shaman. It's really weird and kind of hard to figure out. And just a lot of it is not very intuitive. But you basically just capture points on the map. There's like 2 types of points. There's 3. There's factory points, ship/air factory points, and recruitment centers. And recruitment centers give you the only in-battle resource, which is manpower. So you just use manpower and you spam units, and then the enemy spams units, and whoever has the most manpower wins. There's not really any strategy to it. It's not fun. It's not interesting. It's just who can click faster, who happens to have the better cards, that kind of thing. I really didn't enjoy it, so I admit I just used a trainer because I wanted to actually like finish this game, and I couldn't take how bad the tactical combat was. It was like physically painful to try to play it, and the graphics look like shit. And I know maybe that's not a fair like thing to criticize this game for, but it looks absolutely hideous. Okay, so the tactical combat's bad. I mean, I've played Total War games where I almost never do tactical combat and I just focus on the strategy map. So what's the strategy map like? The strategy map is one of the most bizarre, like incoherent things I've ever seen. So there's 3 different strategy maps. There's the beginner map, the Civil War map, and then the final map. And to win the map, you have to take your enemy's capital. And they're some of the maps are really big, like they might have like 50 provinces on them. But it doesn't really matter if you take any of those provinces. If you have like a decent selection of cards and you have a big enough army, you can just literally rush their capital on the first or second turn, take it out, and then the map's done. You could probably, I don't know, if you were somehow good at the tactical combat, or you used, I don't know, a resource cheat, you could beat the combat, like the strategic gameplay in like 15 minutes or something, if you ignore cinematics and stuff like that. So is that really good game design? I guess it's supposed to be like if you attack the capital right away, it's supposed to be really difficult. But to me, I just found myself stalling and trying to not take their capital just to see if there was something else to the game. So you take territories, and there's only 2 types of resources on the overmap. There's gold and research points, and you can build 1 building per province. Some of the buildings give you cards, like mercenaries or additional manpower or increased gold production or something like that. The research in this game is complete garbage. You basically, it just gives you research points, and you don't unlock any research. You just have all the research from the beginning, and you just buy it. And most of it is like completely worthless. Some of it is unlocking new units, which you need. But A lot of it is giving special abilities to your units, which doesn't really matter, and I didn't really care about it, but it's just like you literally just go to the imp in your command ship and he just upgrades things. Like there's nothing more to it. There's not really like a research function like you have in Civilization or something, or the Total War game series. It's so stripped down. And you can also use research to learn spells. I forgot to mention it, but in tactical combat you can transform into a dragon and manually control the dragon and attack enemies. I tried this once or twice, and I found the dragon form just really, really sucked. It was absolutely horrendous. So I just never used the dragon form. Because it just gimped you, it made you really weak. That sort of thing. Maybe there's like a way to upgrade it. The other thing is, if I'm playing an RTS, I want to be able to, like, command my units. I can't really command my units if I'm like flying around in dragon form. I think there's ways to do it, but it's just like a gimmick they put in to try to make this different. Like, it's like, oh, we have a dragon with a jetpack. This is super cool. But other than that, the strategic map is just garbage. One of the many shitty things about this game is they like build it up that you're fighting your brothers and sisters and they're crazy and they're wild. But there's like there's no indication of that. Like there's no factions. Everyone has the exact same units. There's no special bonuses. It's just throw units in the meat grinder. You don't have like the other members of your family like taunt you or tell you they're going to destroy you or have cinematics of them doing crazy stuff. That's just not in the game. It's just generic map after generic map with absolutely no events. Probably the best thing to do is to just stay on the first map, conquer all the provinces but the capital, and just build research facilities on every island, every province, and just max out your tech, because there's no time limit, and when you move to the next map, you lose all your resources, but you keep your research. So, I mean, that's just what you have to do in this game. So this brings us to the closest thing this game has to being decent, and this is the RPG elements. So the plot, if you can call it that in this game, is there's the great steampunk empire, and it collapsed because the emperor died and there was a succession crisis, and you're the bastard son of the emperor. You're a half-dragon. He fell in love with a dragon in human form, and his court wizard, who's like Merlin, has said, you're the only sane one. You're the only one who can restore the empire and lead us back to glory. Like I said, a very creative, genre-bending plot. So he comes and supports you, and you're visited by representatives of the 5 major races. Although there's also humans, and you represent humanity. So there's an elven ambassador, a dwarven ambassador, a lizard person ambassador, like actual lizards, an imp ambassador, and an undead ambassador. And this is kind of like the most interesting part of the game. So each faction has very different values and political views. So the undead are ultra conservative, very, very religious. So they take socially conservative issues. Like one of their proposals is they discover one of their famous artists was actually homosexual, so they smash all the works of art made by them, and they just have stuff like that, and they view their undeadness as a form of immortality gifted to them by the gods. So they tend to be very like that way. The dwarves, I think, are the funniest. The dwarves are based off of the Republican Party, so they're family values, but they're also like extreme capitalists. So, for instance, they have a ritual where they like abandon adulterers in the woods, and so that they'll starve and get eaten by wild animals. But they're also like they try to make you pass like copyright laws and lower taxes and stuff like that. So they're pretty interesting. The lizard people are just big brain centrists. They're pretty obnoxious. The elves are like left-wing green hippies, and the imps are just insane. They just like progress, they like technology, they like not being told what to do, that sort of thing. So they're always like trying to get you to fund like their nuclear research or stuff like that. Generally speaking, I was able to please the undead, the dwarves, and the imps, but I was hated by the lizard people and the elves. So basically how it works is every turn, you normally get one decision you have to make by talking to one of the ambassadors or one of your generals. And it's so lame. It's like, I think that we should have marriage equality. Do you think you should allow two women to get married? And it's just like yes or no. And if you say no, then like the dwarves and the undead are like, that's based and red pilled. And the elves will be like, you're just a hater, man. You just hate. And that sort of thing. And one of your generals comes from like a society in which gender roles are reversed, so men do housework and women are warriors. And she just spends the whole time bitching about patriarchy in your army and like systemic oppression. And she's really annoying, and she keeps asking for shit like, oh, we have to allow more women to serve in the army and stuff like that. And she's like the most annoying character. So you just kind of go through that. Like I said, it's not very deep. The approval doesn't even matter. It gives you like some irrelevant bonus. I think it's like plus 3% research, plus 3% to gold production. It doesn't give you unique units. It doesn't give you combat bonuses. It's completely pointless. It's just that it's the only sort of interesting aspect of this game, but it's just so half-assed and doesn't matter. Like, the ship only has like 5 rooms on it. It's like a really bad point and click. Probably the most interesting aspect of the RPG point is when you get to pick a bride. So you can pick up so the imps don't have a bride because she died in an unfortunate smelting accident. So you can pick the lizard bride, the undead bride, the dwarven bride, or the elven bride. So I don't really know much about the elven bride. She's very obviously beautiful, kind of typical elven woman. The dwarven woman is pretty hot, actually. I mean, despite being like short, she's pretty attractive. From my understanding, she's fairly, because the dwarves have a fairly conservative culture, so she's fairly, I think, submissive and lets you be the boss and stuff like that. But she apparently has some sort of dark background. The lizard woman is the least attractive one, at least until you get the undead one a body, but we'll get into that in a minute. So the lizard person just is like an insufferable bitch. She's like, I don't love you. I'm not interested in sex. I just want to be your big-brained spouse. And it's really annoying. And then you have the undead woman who's initially completely hideous, but there's a number of quest chains in order to try to get her an actual body. Now, what's interesting is despite being an undead, she has a disease which is going to destroy her second life, I guess. Her undeath, because her corpse is rotting. So, one of the things you can do is you can lobotomize a attractive slave and put her mind into that. However, she doesn't like being mortal, and she immediately sells her soul to a demon to become an immortal vampire. She's hot, though, if she does that, so, I mean, that's good. You can get her to go into a machine body, and she looks substantially better like that, but she's made out of metal. You can also do a Franken machine body, where she takes the machine body, but then she takes the skin and flesh and grafts it onto her body, so she kind of looks like a moderately attractive Frankenstein. And then there's the one I went with, where you hire a mage to magically create her a body. And the option there is either you pay the mage a whole bunch of money, or you let him spend a night with her because she's really hot once the body gets made. And if you pick that one, she drugs him and she just sleeps next to him because he that fulfills the letter of the agreement, if not the spirit. So she is very, I guess you could say, very religious, very submissive, very, like, she always talks about how much she loves you, how she wants to spend time with you. Ophelia is her name. I think she's by far the most, like, popular of the princesses. I think she's also, like, one of the mascots of the game because of how sexy her true form is. And that's kind of like the most interesting part of Dragon Commander, but that's like literally 4 or 5 times you talk to her and that whole thing gets resolved. And it's only like a couple lines of dialogue per visit. And then there's some like half-assed thing where the ship you're on has a demon at its core, and that demon becomes like the main villain who doesn't have any backstory and doesn't have any point. It's like one of the most stripped down, lazy, phoned in pieces of garbage I've ever seen. But I'm doing such a long review because I think the concept is not bad. I think it is salvageable. I mean, the way they did it, it was not salvageable. This game isn't salvageable. But it would be interesting to see this used a bit more. Something like more like a kind of a Total War game. At least what Total War used to be like before they went crazy. Some sort of Total War game. I think King Arthur the role-playing game is somewhat like this, but I could just never really get the hang of that. But I think it has potential. It's an interesting case in which there's a concept that has absolutely no executional strength whatsoever. And that's why I thought it would be interesting to talk about, because it's a failure, but it's an interesting failure. So, I hope you enjoyed the video. God bless, and there's more reviews to come.